Here.
Director Jacobs,
Here.
Director Skinner,
Here.
Vice Chair Haslam,
Here.
Chair Lawson.
Here.
And we have the invocation next.
David, you got it or want me to get
I
it?
can take it. Sorry, I forgot. I'll take it.
Want me to take it?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not excluding anybody else.
No,
I
you're
just,
good. You're good. Father God, thank you for continuing to allow us to live in a world, or at least a country that's been mostly safe, and a world where we have opportunities to do everything that we need. God, Father God, thank you for this meeting. Please protect it tonight. Protect all of us here. Amen. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our next item of business is the adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Chair, I'd make a motion that we adopt the minutes, or adopt the agenda as written.
I would second that.
So we have a motion and a second. Public comment? Okay, no public comment? Back.
Hi there. Thanks for the opportunity to give some comment. Like many others. Oh, yeah, thanks. I'm David Hastings. I'm on the Sierra Club and yeah, live here in Gainesville about 4 years, a proud GRU customer. Yeah, thanks to all the GRU staff and everybody involved in recovering from the hurricane. We finally just got all that debris moved out, which was fantastic. Wanted to point out that yesterday the owners of GRU, the citizens of Gainesville, voted to restore local control of our public utility, transferring control from the authority appointed by the governor to local control, which is the principle of home rule. And for those of you who didn't pay close attention, it was about 73%, 72.6% who voted yes, and 27.5% who voted no. So that's a pretty clear indication, an overwhelming affirmation that the people of Gainesville want to eliminate this governing body. We want greater influence over the mission and management of GRU through citizen action and voting. We want GRU policies and priorities to be determined not by the governor, but by city ordinances that reflect community priorities regarding social, environment, and many other goals. We want for the GSC, the General Services Contribution, to revert to the previous debt reduction plan already set in place, which will ensure stable and predictable funding for essential government services and long-term budgeting. We voted to restore a single unified city government for Gainesville, eliminating duplication of many services, including legal, auditors, a lot of other professional services, and thereby cutting costs. We also want the disparities in energy burdens. As you probably know, Gainesville has part of the community with very low income has very high energy burdens, and that can't be addressed with the current authority because you're simply not allowed to address social or political concerns. So I really appreciate this opportunity to point out. I'm sure you're clearly aware of this overwhelming majority of us who have voted to restore local control of Gainesville Regional Utility. And yeah, I'm also aware of other legal matters pending before us, and so I look forward to seeing how that plays out. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you. Any other comments on the agenda?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, back to the authority for a vote. Any other comments on the agenda?
no, sir.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Our next item of business is the approval of minutes.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion. We approve the minutes as stated.
I'll second.
Oh, we have a motion and a second. Public comment on the approval of the minutes. Seeing no comment, back to the board. Any additional comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the chair comments.
Just a few things I wanted to mention. I wanted to first thank our GRU senior leadership as well as all of our legal counsel at Folds Walker and extended legal counsel who supported us during the recent hearings and the incredible work that you put into that. And just really want to thank you for your continued diligence in defending House Bill 1645. And I look forward to continuing to work with you. At some point in the meeting, I would be interested to entertain a motion from the board that all costs incurred by the GRU associated with defending House Bill 65 should be passed through to the city. And so I'd like to ask Mr. Bielarski to report that out on a periodic basis, but that the GRU should not be bearing the cost to defend 1645. So with that, those are the only comments that I had as chair.
Make it now.
Is that something you're wanting to make a motion on now? We talk about now, or do you want to wait till further on in the meeting?
Mr. Walker, do you
I
have?
think you can, if you
Okay.
so choose to make that motion now.
Yeah, all right.
Does that make sense?
That perfectly makes sense. I think that definitely should be happening for sure. Carter, you're still here. Do you want to make the motion, or do you want one of us to try to?
I'm trying
Try to make it
to.
happen.
He's trying not to.
No, what I'm trying to do is, I think we all need an opportunity to make motions, get comfortable making
All right.
them. So
Well,
if I hear a delay, I'll jump in. But
So I'll do my best. I would make a motion that any costs associated with legal fees would be passed on to the city, legal fees pertaining to the referendum. How do we word this?
Any cost associated with the GRU incurs, any cost, not just legal. but
So any cost that GRU would incur related to the lawsuit that we're under about the governing board, the governing authority, is that how we word it?
Anything.
Defending House Bill 1645.
To defend House Bill
There you go.
1645.
That wasn't as eloquent as Carter would do, but did that work? Almost? No?
You feel like that's clear enough?
Yes.
All right.
All right, so we have a motion
Motion.
I'll second. Oh,
and a second. So public comment?
Mr. Chair, Jim Conish, I commend you, sir. But, sir, this is just the very beginning. There are so many things like this where insult is added to injury. You saw the level of representation you received. You saw the judge and you saw me. This is just an outrage. But this authority should have acted much earlier and never let this language get on the budget. You waited 3 months to authorize Mr. Walker to take legal action, and he showed you what he's made of. By that time, the ballots were printed. This puts the judge in a horrendous situation. But I have total confidence in our judiciary. They don't judge the wisdom of legislation. No court does that in this country. They judge the legality of it. And Mr. Nee and the city of Gainesville have no case. And this is just a pathetic abuse of the process that's becoming more and more common. And in fact, the Florida bar is beginning to look at this concept of zealous representation that defies the facts, that defies the law, that distorts the truth. It makes a mockery of our system. And this is an example of what Mr. Nee has done with zealous representation. He's gone into like a very dark place to appease his masters who pay him the big money. Thanks.
Thank you. Seeing no other comments, back to the board for discussion.
I'd like to say that, it's clear in the bill that they were supposed to support a smooth transition, and that hasn't happened. So, really leaves us no recourse but to try to transfer those.
Okay, with no other comments, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Chair Lawson. Our next item of business is general public comment.
Mr. Chair, I'm going to try to move fast.
Clarification.
Jim
Did
Conish?
we, I'm sorry, Mr. Pointer, did we cover the consent under the regular agenda, or have we? Because I know we were back and forth, but it was covered
Yes, Director Carter, that's covered under the consent agenda.
under the
under
regular
the-
adoption of agenda.
Yes, sir, the
Okay,
adoption of the
just wanted to
agenda.
make sure. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you for that.
That's right. In addition to bringing forth the predecessor 1325 bill filed by Keith Perry after the purchase of the biomass plant, I requested an operational audit of GRU at the joint legislative delegation hearing in the fall of 2019. I think you all need to take a very, very close look at this. Finding 3 was referred to the court. That's the SOA lawsuit that we really haven't dealt with, and they're huge. But also, there's the matter of the bond counsel, who does not report to Mr. Walker, reports to Mr. Nee. And Otter had a big problem with the billing and the lack of competitive bidding. In 2.5 years, Holland Knight billed 800 grand, and an advisor billed 500 grand, according to the Auditor General. And they don't even report to Mr. Walker. They report to Mr. Nee, who you fired, essentially. Not that ethically he should be representing GRU, the authority, anyway, but he thinks he's Teflon coated, and he thinks the ethics rules don't apply to him. This concept that we're going to just run our plants indefinitely and not deal with their finite lifespan is really contradicted in this thing about energy supply. You got a 1976 plant that you can't get a part for. You got one on eBay, it didn't work. One part constricts the output of an entire plant. The generation of electricity is one of the most complex industrial processes on the face of the earth. And the idea that we're going to be able to run our dirty, uneconomic, old plants indefinitely without any proof is just simply not true. Very disturbing to read your own backup, which I'm providing to you. I see the hospital is #1 on major projects, the new hospital on Archer Road. I'm sure they'll take good care of you. They give you this pathetic report that is a fraction of what they gave to the UAB, which has been disbanded. I don't know if this is correct, but in March 22, they have 1,359 residential customers disconnected. And according to these numbers, it's 15% of all residential customers got disconnected for 1 year, and the average amount owed was about $250. Meanwhile, the Alachua County Commission doesn't pay for over $1 million for street light per year for 30 years, and nothing happens. Now, are you doing your job not to even get the current data, which apparently hasn't been updated in 2 years? How many people are being disconnected with these smart meters at the touch of the button? I was improperly disconnected myself
Thank you, Mr.
3 times. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Angela Castillo. Well, since last night, we saw the numbers come in. Number one, 40% of the customer base didn't get to vote, and they are customers, and they should have a say. 2, the way that the campaign was run was extremely falsified in the way that it says, vote yes for local public utilities. I ask each one of you, are you local? Would that seem that our utilities are still local? That to me should be illegal. And then we have Brian Eastman, Commissioner Brian Eastman, going on campus to the polling place and telling people how to vote. Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're ready to move on.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the CEO comments.
I just had a few cleanup items, as well as a couple of updates. I wanted to let the folks know that we have onboarded an HR, human resource specialist, who will work 10 to 20 hours a week on a consulting basis to facilitate the establishment of GRU HR policies that will come as a result of working with staff, working with the HR department at the city, so that we can build a policy that best fits GRU as an entity in really a dynamic energy environment right now. The other task that the person will have will be to actually come up with a job description for the chief people officer and lead that effort to try to onboard that individual that will lead the HR function. Now, we haven't decided yet how that will operate. We may have a standalone HR department. We may have some of it work with HR at the city as it's structured. It will be determined. We've talked to some of the board members about doing a cost-benefit analysis on that. What are the pluses and minuses of each one of those various structures? So I just wanted to let you know that we're doing that. And I think one of the things that we've identified is that there's a different internal philosophy between how HR works at general government and at the utility. It's not good or bad, it's just different. And there's a concern that actually city HR staff has expressed to us that they may not be capable of handling two policies. Fair. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. We're going to have some further discussions on that. So just wanted to let you know about that. The second thing was, I think there's been some discussion, notification back and forth from the City Commission about the SLAs. We've heard it here on the floor too. There's 6 major SLAs. There's payroll, there's risk, there's pension obligation, a big one, fleet, then there's HR, and there's IT services. If you take IT out, which is the city paying us, that's about $17 million. It's an equitable amount of money to pay for those services. We're working on finalizing those. We have some differences, but right now, it's hard to get the bandwidth to negotiate those fully, particularly being in the somewhat adversarial relationship with the city. So I just wanted to let you know that. But there was one open item, and that was from the budget. And I was instructed by the board to recoup the $3 million loss in the IT SLA for 2024. If you remember, we signed it at $2.9 million, and the cost came back at $5.9 million. So I've had some discussions with the city manager. And here, okay, she has it up there. There's some numbers that float around, so let me just throw it up there. I initially proposed to solve that $3 million issue, let's just extend the IT SLA for another year. That allows us to recoup that $3 million in one extension. And basically forgive that first $3 million. The city manager declined, saying that they only wanted 1 year. on the agreement. So really had no further movement. And I will tell you that the agreement was signed. I believe in honoring agreements. So it is a little forward, maybe a little disingenuous to ask to change an agreement that's already been signed. But the city, on the other hand, has, and it was brought up tonight, the 2023 streetlight memorandum of understanding that Mr. Cunningham had signed with the city manager that said the city would pay that $1.3 million a year. Mr. Conish had mentioned this at his time at the lectern. The city commission said, nope, GRU is going to pay that. So we've paid $2.6 million that the city should have paid. So my recommendation to the board, and I think you can make a motion to this effect, I think that we ought to not get the recoupment of that $3 million for the ITSLA in fiscal '24. Let's honor the agreement. But at the same time, let's honor the agreement we have with the city that they should pay the $2.6 million for streetlights and $1.3 million in every year thereafter. So going forward, you will reduce the GFT by that $1.3 million a year, or if they don't decide to pay it. So I think the motion would be, if I can prompt the board, to forgive the $3 million or withdraw that recommendation for that $3 million recoupment in fiscal year '24, and to instruct us to take that $2.6 million out of the latest payment made to the city. Because we were holding the $3 million in abeyance.
But basically, Ed, what you're saying is that we will follow the agreements that we've signed, and then as the agreements come up for renewal, we'll renegotiate those at what's appropriate. So we stick with what we've signed.
Yes, sir.
Is what you're saying.
Yes, sir.
Which we didn't know about, that there was an SLA for the lights before until you did the research. I mean,
I don't know that it was prominently
I don't think the
discussed.
board this has been discussed with the board.
Mr. Chair, I was told about that and had that discussion with the former CEO and the city manager, and it was clear as mud. I mean, it just, and to this day, I mean, Ed and I had this conversation last week. So, yeah, it was clear as mud, to be honest with you.
As I'm discussing it, I can understand how convoluted it sounds, because we're talking about an agreement, whether we're recovering it or not. But you're exactly right. We ought to honor the agreements we've signed, and if there's monies that, aren't being paid, we ought to be able to use the GFT as the collection method for that.
I have one question, because it was a little complicated. Why not recover the other $3 million that they owe us as well?
Excuse me?
The other $3 million, why forgive that?
We literally signed an agreement, executed a service level agreement for fiscal year '24. And for fiscal year '25, the city has put that $5.9 million in their budget.
Okay.
I can make the motion if you would like, Mr. Chair. I understand what he wants to do.
That'd be great.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that GRU will honor their original agreement with the IT for fiscal year '24. We will recoup the $2.6 million for the streetlights, which is an agreement they signed with us for fiscal year '24 and '23. And then going forward, we will be charging the city or reducing the payment by $1.3 million going forward.
You got it.
I read it. Wasn't too hard.
I could have done it, even if I read it.
So we have a motion
Yeah, I would second that motion.
and a second. Public comment? No public comment. Back to the board. Any discussion?
No, sir, I just wanted to make it clear, in my motion, I was saying that we're going to honor what we signed, we're just asking them to do the same. We're not being punitive here, we're being corrective. Is that your intention, sir?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it's my understanding, Ed, you will go and renegotiate the IT agreement. There is risk, we talked about in the previous board, there's risk with that because the city could outsource that and then we would be left sort of with that, the carrying cost of the infrastructure.
Yeah,
So there's
fixed
some
cost.
risk to us. We hope we can work it out, but right now, we're gonna honor our agreements.
I would add, if you wouldn't mind, Chair, that they've made it pretty clear at the city that they only want 1 year and they want to move away. I think we're going to need to talk to them a little bit more for them to better understand the infrastructure the GRU has, because I don't think that they're looking at the fully baked numbers. So they're pretty firm right now as to only 1 year. I'm hoping that after we get through some of this, that, you know, maybe it will be a little better understood and it'll be a better decision for both parties.
All right, with all in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
The other thing I wanted to bring on everyone's attention to, you probably heard about the $47 million grant that we got on the Grid Resilience and Innovation Partnership. They call it a GRIP grant. Don't say that quickly 3 times, you might hurt yourself. But it is really pretty exciting. It has a nice history here with the utility. It really came out of COVID in 2020, when we were in the grips of COVID and all the monies that were being discussed and put into grants and other government programs. One of the primary ones was the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, it was called at that point. Actually, I have to give some credit to our CFO, Claudia Rasnick. We were looking at some money to help our customers pay their bills. And she was working with the county folks, and she came up with a couple of these things and said, well, what about DOE? So we actually retained at that time Holland and Knight, not the legal side, but the consulting side. They came in and they introduced us to some of the main players. I mean, they have folks in Washington that are working with legislators, and they had connections that we could only dream of. So we got introduced to DOE, Department of Energy, and weren't successful until this past year, when Tony and his team put together an acceptable GRIP grant that came up with $47.5 million grant. It's basically 2/3 of capital expenditures and community benefits that will be paid by the Department of Energy. So right now we're in what they call a contract negotiation phase. It's a little odd because I think of negotiations, I say, well, okay, we're not doing that, we're doing this, or, that type of thing. And it's basically filling out the paperwork for this, and it's very structured. We just had a meeting before this, and Rick Hutton was there talking about some of this stuff. And they estimate 120 days to do this, and I think we'll get that done. But just to give you an idea, we're talking about replacement of 10 transformers, transmission pole replacements, reclosers. There's an opportunity here for us to actually extend some of the transmission line from Parker to Duke. That gives us access to a lot of solar or other types of power that will be advantageous for the utility. So it's really a good deal. We're very excited about it, and we're going to be working through this contract negotiation and set up for the programs. So I just wanted to let everyone know that.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Mr. Walorski, roughly what did that cost us to have Holland and Knight do that? Was it under 500,000 or?
Yeah, we, Holland and Knight's expenses were, I think, $300,000. It was not a lightweight.
300 got us 47 million?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay,
Yeah.
anybody want to sign up on that deal? Just when you hear some of these numbers,
Right.
and they put everything in the same basket, these numbers aren't wrong, but there's results we're getting from these numbers. It's, I would like someone to tell the whole story, but I sort of suspected that was the case. Thank you.
Yes, yes. And actually, we're not using Holland and Knight now, but we're using Baker Tilly, who also, the other arm does our audits. But they're experts in the field of actually going out and saying, what you can negotiate in a replacement of what you've put into the application and what the recovery of some of your overhead expenses will be. This will be very, very good for the utility. There is a component that is community benefits that help some of the underserved communities. There's undergrounding that will go into some of the underserved communities that may have longer outages than other communities. So this is really great, particularly given our customer-first focus at this point.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the program? I'm fine.
You'll keep us updated?
Yes.
Going
Oh, absolutely. We'll try to make this part of that state of the utility. We'll keep a running total, what's happening with that. That's the point of the whole, well, I'll talk about that when we talk about the state of the utility. The other thing I wanted to mention was there was this little controversy with the city commission on their trail program. I think there's like 1 1/3 miles where they're ready to go and operate in some of our easements. One of the problems GRU had in completing that as timely as they want, first off, it's a 5-year period of time that this has been underway. But we had to have our new council, Folds Walker, look at the agreement. We couldn't have the city look at their own agreement and advise us on our agreement. So I'm blaming Scott. But no, they're looking at the agreement, and that's why we had.
Are we close to being
Yeah.
finished now?
Yeah, we are. We'll be able to do that pretty quickly. So I just wanted to give that information. I think with that, I'm done. We can go into the business items.
Thank you.
Attorney comments.
Thank you, Chair Lawson. Our next item of business is attorney comments.
Mr. Chair, thank you for your comments earlier. We appreciate the compliment very much. And to give you an update on where we're at with the litigation, attorneys can take differing positions on the law, perhaps on the facts, and argue them as much as they possibly can for the client's benefit, but we do get along very collegially outside of that. So we're working with Daniel Nee's office to schedule the submission of the order. The order has been drafted, it's gone to his office, it's gone through our entire team, including our CEO's side for their input. And we think we have it in format, should go to Judge Wright. I would think probably tomorrow is when but the order is effective per his ruling at the hearing. So his verbal ruling is in effect as it sits right now. It's just coming up with a written documentation for that order, and that's been done. It's been approved by Dan's office, approved by our office, and so it should be submitted shortly and submitted to the judge. The second piece of it is, when do we get to finality, hopefully, with regard to this litigation? The judge had some time on December 19th and 20th, but that doesn't work for the scheduling and doesn't work to get to the end of the result. Mr. Nee's office and our office believe that the issues, maybe in totality, can be resolved through what is called a motion for summary judgment. So we're trying to work on that schedule as well. That will probably happen in, as far as the ruling or the hearing, will happen in either January or February of 2025. What a motion for summary judgment is basically that there's no genuine issues of material fact that are in opposite with each other. It's mostly an argument over the law. So they submit their motion on the law, we submit our motion on the law. You can attach affidavits and transcript of the hearing, things like that. And then the court rules based upon what the law is according to the judge. So we're anticipating, and Mr. Nee's office is anticipating that we'll both do that. We're working out that scheduling right now for the court. And we hope in January we'll have resolution to the matter and try to get that done in that fashion. So that's our report, Mr. Chair.
Any questions?
Of course. I just clarification for people watching and citizens out there. I was asked last night by TV20, what happens now? Well, what happens now is we still do the good work of the utility. We still have a great general manager, CEO. We have a wonderful board, chairman, and amazing employees. We're still going forward, correct, Mr.
Exactly
Attorney?
right.
Until we're told otherwise by a judge.
That's exactly correct.
Okay.
Yes.
I just want everybody out there to hear that because there's a lot of confusion. I talked to a few intelligent people today that really had no idea what was going to happen today. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you, sir.
Spot on.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott.
You bet.
Thank you, Chair Lawson. The next item of business is on to business discussion items. 2024-798 natural gas prepay transaction.
So good evening, Claudia Resnick, CFO. I believe we have Chris Lover from PFM online. Christine?
Yes, Claudia, I'm here.
Perfect. So we have a few items before you this evening. This is the first one. It's a natural gas prepay transaction. GRU has been wanting to do something like this for several years now. There was some reticence because of the fossil fuel component. But at the end of the day, it does save dollars for our customers. So we're very pleased to bring this forward to the authority to hopefully move forward on a transaction or a series of transactions. So the topic in and of itself can get quite complicated. But at the end of the day, we're trying to purchase natural gas at a discount. And we can pull that into the fuel adjustment, which will help our customer bills. So I've asked Chris Lover from PFM to go through the presentation, answer any questions to make sure that the authority is comfortable. The public has a chance to ask questions as well. But we would anticipate receiving authority to start the process because we can't actually execute for about 4 to 6 months. So it does take a little while to get it in place because you do have to be part of a deal. It does take a little bit of time. So the sooner we start, the sooner we can start to receive those savings. So do you have any questions of me? If not, I'll hand it directly over to Mr. Lover. Okay, thanks, Chris.
Well, good evening, and I'm Chris Lover. I work for Public Financial Management. We serve as the financial advisor to GRU and as your fiduciary. And the topic today is a natural gas prepayment transaction, which is, as a summary here on this page, it can be convoluted when you look at all the boxes and arrows, but the reality is it is a way for GRU to save some money. It is not a new transaction. These were authorized back by Congress in 2005. They've been thoroughly reviewed and scoured by the Internal Revenue Service. And since the passage of that law, there have been about $100 billion of natural gas prepaid transactions in the market. So fairly common in the public power space. GRU should look at this as a 30-year transaction, a 30-year gas supply contract. But it does have an initial term that's typically between 5 and 7 years. That's called the segment. And within the contracts that you'll sign with the gas provider, you will have a minimum level of savings. And in general, that's between, based on market conditions, between 40 cents in an MMBTU and 50 cents in an MMBTU. At the end of the segment, there will be a reset where the transaction essentially rolls over. They try to get investors to buy the bonds. And typically that saving steps down and to usually that 20 cents per MMBTU level. There are opportunities at the resets to extend the transaction, to put more natural gas volumes into it, which will increase your savings. But initially we look at the first segment being a minimum of 50 cents and then 20 cents thereafter, but there are ways to adjust at the resets.
There are some off-ramps to this transaction. The most interesting one is what we call a switch feature, where if GRU no longer wants natural gas, needs natural gas, then we could switch it to energy. And the dollars that we're going to go buy a molecule of gas will now buy kilowatt hour of electricity or megawatt hour of electricity. If at the resets the savings are not achieved at 20 cents level, then people walk away and there's no recourse to GRU for paying off any bonds or any debt. GRU also has an ability to, what they say, remarket the gas if it's not needed, and essentially it will go to another municipal utility. The debt associated with these transactions, as I mentioned, $100 billion of debt have been issued over the past 20 years. It's non-recourse to folks who are the natural gas off-taker. So it doesn't appear on GRU's books, it doesn't appear on your balance sheet, and it's non-recourse. What this does represent is a relatively routine transaction that we're seeing across a lot of GRU's peer public power utilities. It's also considered a best practice as a means to offer diversification of fuel supply. It does mean that you could mitigate increases in your fuel adjustment rate. And at the end of the day, GRU and the transactions being contemplated is really just signing a commodity supply contract for 30 years, and you're going to be able to get that commodity at a discount to an index. Currently, if you look at some natural gas prices, it's $2 an MMBTU, and with a 50 cent saving threshold, we're talking about a 25% savings. Granted, that's going to change as the index changes, but that amount of savings is locked in for the initial segment. If there are no questions, I'll go to our next slide. And really, what we've established essentially is what we call a conduit issuer. This entity basically can issue the debt, and that's why it stays off of GRU's books. And those proceeds are essentially used to buy natural gas or energy at a discount. It's a good way to diversify your commodity suppliers, your natural gas suppliers, so it does actually provide a level of risk management. And really, your liability is really just to pay for the natural gas that is delivered to you. If it doesn't get delivered for whatever reason, you don't pay for it. It can be, GRU has a pretty rigorous hedging strategy, and it can be incorporated into a natural gas prepay, can be incorporated into that hedging strategy. And in the end, if the transaction unwinds, it comes down, you don't meet that savings threshold, essentially you kind of walk away and you lose the savings per MMBTU, but at the same time, you can return to your standard procedures of just buying natural gas in the spot market. Some questions that we think most folks have about these prepays: who participates? How do you generate these savings? Is it risky? Kind of what's the overall structure in terms of debt? And what considerations does you need to think about in order to enter one of these transactions? So for who participates, if you look around basically I-4 North in the state of Florida, you can see a bunch of familiar names here: OUC, Tallahassee, JEA. They've all been involved in prepay transactions. When you look down to these the second, third row, really some very large public power names. MEAG is in Georgia, SMUD is Sacramento, but they're heavily engaged in these transactions as a means to lower their commodity costs, whether that is natural gas or whether that's actual energy that they're prepaying for. So fairly common, and your neighbors around you are essentially doing the same transaction and have been doing it for a few years. In terms of participation levels, PFM serves as financial advisor to a few of these conduit issuers. This is what we've worked with recently. The 2024 numbers are a little low. And I'd say the reality is that over the last 2 to 3 weeks, we've had $5 billion of these prepaid transactions, in the marketplace. So fairly common, and they're fairly large transactions. Again, you're not worried about the debt. You're just kind of worried about receiving your natural gas. How are the savings generated? This is a lot of words on a slide. Really what it boils down to is that this is a vehicle that the IRS has approved and tested a way for a taxable organization to receive money that is a tax exempt rate. So taxable rate is higher. In this case, we throw out a number for a cost of capital, cost of funding of 4%, and these bonds can generally be issued at a lower level, call it in that 3 or 4% range. So as a taxable entity, you're getting this funding. It represents savings to you, and what you're doing is you're sharing a portion of that savings back to the folks who are buying the gas from you. So really it is, I'll call it a legal form of arbitrage is what it is, but it does represent an interesting funding source for certain corporations. We do have our standard kind of block and chart here. There are kind of three players here: the municipal utility, the conduit issuer, and the aggregator. This is the person that gets all the natural gas volumes across multiple utilities. And then we have a gas supplier. So to put a kind of a name on it here, the Gas Authority is an entity in Georgia that does these types of transactions routinely. And then when you think about a gas supplier, maybe we can use an example of the bank Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs has a commodity arm, and the commodity arm is the one that supplies natural gas. And that Goldman Sachs parent corporation is the one that guarantees for the payment of the bonds. They have a parental guarantee, hence they're not on the balance sheet of GRU or any of these folks on the left. So in terms of this transaction, GRU would sign a gas supply contract with, for example, the Gas Authority, and a lot of these boxes and activities and events really are just going on in the background. But it does illustrate kind of the overall structure. So we'll kind of go through it. So we'll have a prepay bond that's issued. These are very large transactions, typically 500 million is the smallest, upwards of 1.5 billion was one transaction last week. So when you issue the bonds, you get proceeds. These bond proceeds then flow to this gas supplier. In this example, this was Goldman Sachs, but there are others out there. In return, the gas supplier provides gas, flows through to GRU, and then GRU is going to pay for that gas that's delivered, and that's at an index price. So think of maybe sort of Henry Hub natural gas, but it's a fluctuating index, goes up and down like the Dow Jones or the S&P. And then here's where it gets a little more complicated, is that our bonds are fixed rate bonds, but we have a variable index. So there's a mismatch in potential cash flow as opposed to a little bit of risk. Again, you're just paying for your gas, but here's how it's fixed. There's what we call a commodity swap that translates this fluctuating index price into a fixed price. Again, it's behind the curtain for GRU, and then that's what pays the debt service. So again, you receive the gas, you pay the index price less a discount. Discount generally between 40 and 50 cents an MMBTU. And then you are not liable for the bonds that are issued. There are some things around the structure here where there's some investment. There's some dollars there for working capital and to deal with some fluctuations that might exist. But again, you're not too concerned about that. Again, you're just paying for the gas and receiving the gas and getting the discount. So that's the overall structure. Again, you're basically buying gas from the Gas Authority. That's kind of where the relationship ends. You don't really care too much about the Goldman Sachs piece. But there are a couple ways that there are a couple of dials and valves here of how the savings are generated. The longer the term, so these are 30-year transactions, the bigger the discount. That's why when we do the reset, the discount gets a little smaller. The higher natural gas prices are, the bigger the discount will be. The discount rate that the gas supplier uses, meaning what's their credit quality. The lower the credit quality means the higher their discount rate is and the better discount you receive. And then again, it's a difference between tax exempt bond rates and taxable bond rates also drive a significant amount of the savings here. Again, being able to essentially find a funding source, it's tax exempt rate rather than paying a higher taxable rate and the sharing of that differential. In terms of risk, we generally think of these transactions as having minimal risk to a utility such as GRU. If the supplier defaults and you don't get the gas, You only pay for what you receive. You do have to find a way to get gas if you need it. If you have too much gas, you're not able to use it, you can do two things. You could remarket it, which means you call up the gas authority and they'll sell it to another municipal entity. And also there are times you could do that over a 2-year period. So there's some options there. The debt, again, doesn't obligate. It's not an obligation of GRU. It doesn't appear on your books. And the rating agencies don't even really know about this or don't care. They won't put it on your liabilities. In fact, I'll look at it and say, wow, you're saving some money on a commodity. That's pretty smart to do. So that's the only commentary you'll see from a rating agency on these prepays. And then if there are other failure to form pieces, there are ways you can replace, whether it was that swap counterparty and the like, but there are ways you can put new puzzles and pieces into the structure, and it continues on. PFM has been involved in a few that older ones that the savings levels weren't achieved, and as advertised, all of the parts came down, and essentially the issuer walked away, and there was no harm at all with them. In fact, they got some dollars from terminating a couple of investment contracts in there. So we have seen these transactions actually fall apart in a sense, and basically the off-takers like the municipal utility were held harmless. How are they structured? Again, I think the middle bullets here, it's a 30-year transaction. They are broken into segments. When the first segment ends, typically 5 to 7 years, you have some options. You roll it over. Generally, it's at lower savings level. And then the transaction continues on. You can also extend on to that second transaction, that second segment to get back to a 30-year transaction, and it'll increase those savings levels. A lot of times we think about those resets as also being a decent time to talk about or address political or regulatory changes. So you can adjust some of your volumes, say, if you're having new regulations either imposed by someone like the EPA or some type of board or governing body. Here's some examples, just two what we call official statements. You can see some of the players besides Goldman Sachs. We have Morgan Stanley, we have RBC, and up here we have Main Street on the right-hand side. That's actually the conduit issuer of the gas authority, who GRU would likely sign a gas supply contract with. What do you need to do to consider? I think the first question is, do we want to save some dollars on a commodity that we use every day and use pretty extensively every day? Most folks will commit a good portion over time, meaning 40 or 50%, maybe even higher, of their natural gas needs into transactions. And then ultimately, there has to be a belief that you're going to be able to use this gas over time too. So you have to be able to look out and say, yeah, we're going to be a natural gas utility as well as an electric utility with natural gas needs over this period of time. So again, a long live transaction. It is a good means to diversify who provides you gas. And so your eggs all aren't in one basket. So it does present a little bit of risk management. Kind of the nuts and bolts questions, really how much gas to put in to the transaction. So GRU does use a lot of gas compared to some other utilities. So you have quite a bit of opportunity to put percentage of the volumes in 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 transactions. The benefit of that is that you're diversifying yourself over time to address different market conditions, whether it's the bond market or the natural gas market. We have seen a lot of banks active in this space, big names like Goldman Sachs, RBC, Morgan Stanley, Citi, TD, and a few others have started to come in here. And the other big decision you have to make in terms of supply is, where do you get the gas delivered? And most people, you can get it delivered, called to what's called the Gainesville City Gate, which is right at the doorstep of where you need it. The switch feature, not all transactions have a switch feature. It depends on who that aggregator is, who issues the bonds. And we think it's a pretty prudent option to have in there, at least for a portion of the prepays you'll be in. Again, you give notice. You give notice once, and then it switches from natural gas to energy. so you can address some of these environmental concerns that are potential environmental mandates. Timing, it generally requires, again, some patience. These transactions are pretty market sensitive, so you might sign the contract and it might take 2 months for the market conditions to hit, and then it'll come in the market, we'll sell the bonds, and then the transaction, the gas flows generally come about 4 months after the bond transaction closes. So even if we said, let's do this today, we price the bonds tomorrow, we probably wouldn't see the first gas flows till second quarter of second quarter of calendar year 25. Generally, people dip their foot in the prepaid pool first. They'll commit maybe 10 or 20% of eligible volumes just to make sure they can integrate it into their operations. And then once they see if there are any complications or changes they need to make, they'll then add more volumes on different transactions down the road. So hopefully we've answered some questions here. The majority of public power utilities are doing this. They have participated or are continuing to participate. They're continuing to reset these transactions at that first segment date. The savings are generated through taxable entities, essentially being given access to tax-exempt interest rates and tax-exempt debt, and it's a sharing of that savings. We don't think they are exceptionally risky. There's non-recourse to the bonds to GRU. And if the event the transaction has to come down and terminates, GRU basically would have to buy that shortfall of gas on the spot market until they could get maybe longer-term contractual arrangements in place. They're generally structured as 30-year transactions with multiple segments. And then for your participation, volumes and delivery points and how do you integrate this into your kind of operations are really the big things. Of course, just the volumes, the easy decision, where you get it, and then the integration piece, you have a couple months to figure that out once you sign on the dotted line of the commodity supply agreement. I think our wrap-up slide is the same as our first slide, kind of an executive summary here. So I'll probably just stop talking and see if there are any questions about prepays and what are the things GRU and the GRUA should think about.
All right, questions? Okay. So my initial thought is obviously we look at our capacity, what we've done on a 5-year run or whatever, thinking that if we bring it down Deerhaven, we don't anticipate doing that for a number of years, but Kelly is all gas and it's our newest system. So, if we were to say, what would Kelly use? And that's the one we're running out. So I feel comfortable we could predict what we're going to use. But some of my curiosity questions were, for the first segment, the 5 to 7 years, we get a realized saving of 50 cents. But when we re-up, we lose over 50% of that, and we're down to 20 cents. When we re-up in another 5 years, we're down to 10 cents? Or does it reprice at the 20?
Well,
wasn't 100% clear on that, because if we go in that progression, it's going to price out. Then I have a couple.
It'll contractually, it'll say, in order to continue that next segment, it has to be 20 cents. So if you can't get the 20 cents, the question comes, well, what's causing that? Is it the market conditions? So the thought there is that no transaction's getting 20 cents, so really the market doesn't support it anymore. So you either accept less than 20 because that's what the market conditions bear and can provide, and you're happy with it, or you just go and eliminate the discount sale just by spot market gas. But I think what most people are doing now is when you hit that first segment, you actually just keep extending it out. So if it's a 5-year segment, so your 30-year transaction goes to 25, at the reset piece, you go back out to 30 years, you add 5 more years of volume on it, and you get back up to that 50-cent level.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. That makes perfect sense to me. And then just as a curiosity thing, more so than anything, once the bonds are realized, we have about a 4 to 6 month startup time before we see the gas flow. So once the contract's over, does that 4 to 6 months also, do we realize that, or do we lose that 4 to 6 months advantage?
You lose the 4 to 6 months. So like if you think about it, if it's a 5-year segment, it's really 4 years and 8 months of gas flows.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering, just curiosity. That's got to pick up on something. Okay. Thank you, sir.
I thought it was very straightforward. When I first got appointed to the board, it's one of the things I had mentioned, if you guys remember, from my time in public transportation. We were always buying fuel at a discount, buying in bulk, trying to hedge our bets, so we're not getting hit with those huge spikes. So I think this is huge. Very little risk involved for us, no additional debt. You know, I'm prepared to start making a motion, but I think, you know, we need to put a cap on this somewhere. With negotiations, whether that's 40%, as you had mentioned, 40 to 50% of our gas usage, or do we want to tail it back to 35% at this point in time? So Ed, I don't know if you've looked at those numbers as of yet, of what percentage we're looking at, because I know we have the numbers like Director Carter had mentioned. Over 5 years, it's easy for us to estimate that.
Want to go, or you want me to go?
So we were looking at up to 50%, because there's something to be said for staggering these deals as well, because you're not also exiting at the same time. So, and we can keep the board apprised as far as what those look like as we're moving through that process.
The other thing that, I don't know that Chris has talked about it, but what was it, 6 months to a year ago, I think the market was more like 30 cents. This is a window of opportunity with the differential between tax exempt and taxable bonds that's pushing it to 40 to 50 cents. So, you know, part of me thinks maybe you want to do a little bit more in the beginning to get that higher rate, because over time, it hasn't been that advantageous. But it's kind of like dollar cost averaging on buying stocks, right? You know, there's a good, oh God, I shouldn't even talk about buying stocks in this venue, but it's about getting the best price over a period of time. So I do like the idea of layering on these other transactions. Then the other thing I did want to mention is, you know, there's 5 top-tier municipal utilities in Florida: JEA, Orlando, Lakeland, and Tallahassee, and us. We're the only ones that don't have any of this right now. So we're losing anywhere between 12 and 25% of a discount on our natural gas prices, which just isn't fair to our customers. And that's why we've really looked at this. This is almost, you know, the cornerstone of a customer-first program in getting them cheaper prices. I mean, if you think about it, right, the 25%, every 4th year you're getting your gas for free. And we're just leaving that on the table. Can't do it.
Just one thing, just for the public's advocation, one of my curiosities was, now we know we have an administration coming into office here that the production of natural gas is going to increase dramatically, most likely. Does that have any effect on when we get in and what kind of prices we can get, or is that outside of the realm of?
I'll have Chris correct me, he probably will, but it's mostly associated with the financing. Whether the gas prices are high or low, you're getting that differential between tax exempt and taxable. And use an example, we're getting 3 or 4% on tax exempt bonds where the taxable rate is 8. That's differential creates this opportunity for dollars that are shared with everyone. Doesn't matter whether there's more gas or not. Is that correct, Chris?
Yes, Ed, that's largely correct.
Oh, he put largely on that.
Of course he did it that way.
Read the fine.
So,
Just the only thing I would add is that the shape of the forward curve, future forward gas curve, will influence also. But it's probably 80% driven by the differential in taxable to tax exempt rates.
So obviously the goal is to save dollars for our customers. The fuel adjustment, we calculate what that looks like on a monthly basis, and we work with the CEO as far as if we need to make any adjustments in the fuel adjustment. We are projecting under current natural gas prices, and we've had this discussion because they do seem a little high, but it looks like they're looking at going to 40 mils next spring. This will help mitigate some of that. if natural gas prices do increase is what we're seeing. So it won't be savings to our customers, but it's mitigating that increase. We are looking at some other things to help with the fuel adjustment as well. And when I started this, I talked about the fossil fuel component. The utility wasn't essentially allowed to move forward with the prepays because of the net zero and to move away from natural gas. And so we weren't able to execute in these transactions to save money for our customers. And that's what we're trying to do here. And we also, again, I'll say it again, we're looking at some other options as well to bring back to the authority. Thank you.
But let me add to Jack's comment. We're talking about the possibility of the fuel adjustment going up sometime next year based on NYMEX prices right over the past, month, and that projects out. You mentioned administration change. That could change dramatically so that this could create not a mitigation of that increase, but actually a reduction. So we're operating in a band right now. So depending on how natural gas production goes, if it's increased, that type of thing, we could be actually looking at a reduction. Not promising that, but.
David, any questions?
Mr. Chair, how does our current gas supplier feel about us entering into this agreement? Our current gas suppliers, they're aware that we're looking at this, correct?
So we work with the Energy Authority, and they procure our natural gas, and they've been involved in these conversations. They're just part of the puzzle. And they've been involved with other utilities. So for example, the Energy Authority works with JEA, who has 14 prepays, I believe. That's what I've heard. And they are also a member of the Energy Authority. So it's just something that they incorporate in their operations.
Claudia, thank you for answering all my questions over the last several days. Did I see one of your analysis that estimated that these savings was somewhere around 6 to 8%? Is that, did I remember that right? What is I see the 40 mils and things like that, but give me some perspective. What is your estimated percentage savings?
So Chris, I think you hit on that. It's 25%.
At the current gas price.
Yeah, current gas prices, that would be 25%.
25%. And so what would be the annual savings? What is a 25% annual savings on, whatever you think? I know you're not going to go all the way up to 50% right out of the gate of our utilization, but just give me a ballpark of what does that mean to the utility?
Thank you for the question. We did calculate that when we were going through these discussions, and looking at a minimum, it's roughly $2 million a year. And so as those volumes are increased, it can increase. So 2 to 4, maybe more, depending on the size of the volumes that we put in there.
And this analysis would really be passed straight through to the customer. So
That's
this
correct.
is not going to be used for debt defeasance, debt reduction. This is truly impacting the rates that our customers will pay.
It's the fuel adjustment. So on the fuel adjustment itself, it's a pass-through of costs. So it's a calculation of costs that have already been incurred and future costs. So when we're talking about the future natural gas pricing, we're trying to figure out essentially how to pay for that in the fuel adjustment process. And so anything having to do with fuel, we put into the fuel adjustment piece, so it goes directly to the customer. Nothing is used for base rates, debt, no other costs. Thank you.
Yeah,
Any other questions? So I agree with you that we need to put in the motion an upper cap. Otherwise, it needs to come back to the board. And I think the recommendation from the leadership was 50%.
Yep, up to 50%. So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we delegate to the CEO or the CFO to negotiate and execute natural PPA or pre-purchase agreement for natural gas, subject to it not going above 50% of our current natural gas usage.
Does that sound accurate?
So the only thing I would clarify is GRU's daily load.
Oh, okay, of GRU's daily load.
Yes.
Then. Okay.
Thank you.
And the savings of greater than 40 cents
Right.
BTU.
That's what you need to add.
Right. All right, so we have a motion.
Second.
A motion and a second. Public comment? Seeing none, back to the board. Any additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you very much, Board. This has been something that we've tried to do for many years. And so thank you very much.
Chris, thank you very much for attending this evening. We appreciate it. We know you're on the road as well, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too.
Thank you, Chair Lawson. Our next business item is 2024-807, State of the Utility Monthly Update, and the recommendation is the GRU Authority. Here's a monthly update from the utilities operational areas.
Actually, we started building on this based on customer or citizen comment, customer comment. Nancy Darren, who is a longtime frequenter of the Utility Advisory Board, used to see our State of the Utility, which I've attached. There's not an overhead for this, is there? I was just going to discuss it, I think.
There is something, yes.
Oh, okay. Okay. She came to one of the meetings and said that that was very useful. And, you know, it really was. I have one of the older forms there, but this is the first iteration of what I hope will become GRU's key performance indicators. And maybe a little bit more, a little bit of a narrative, a little insight, you know, into the utility. And I know this is all hard to see, but it's our effort to offer that amount of transparency. You heard from some of the folks at customer comment that, you know, some of these things, it's a lot of information, but we want to share what the utility is undergoing. You're our board. You need to understand what our recovery is, like on this first one where we talk about, you know, the energy supplies milestones. We've broken this down by each one of the major areas that we have. Energy supply, that's our generating assets. We have energy delivery, and, you know, if there's anything here you want some further explanation on, I actually have my energy supply officer, Dino DeLeo, back there, who's dressed for the occasion. And
He's looking good, Dino.
Yeah, he's looking pretty good back there. And, you know, so he can answer a lot of these questions if you'd like some further analysis. But yeah, there's energy supply. And the first time we did this, a lot of this was narrative. We didn't have time as we're going through some of the other information to get it all pulled together. But each month we'll try to hear your recommendations, see what you'd like to see. The energy supply area, that's our gas, natural gas, and electric delivery services. As you can see, not the fun part, but you used to always grab the folks' curiosity when we'd list the outage causes. You know, over this fourth quarter, you know, I think, is that right there? Yeah, on page 84 of 203. You know, 140 of the 342 outage causes were vegetation. 73 are equipment failure, weather's 28, human cause 26, and animals 25. You know, if you go over to energy delivery, you know, you always have these little, you know, stuffed animals, vicious squirrels that, you know, attack our power lines and things like that that cause the problems, and they get zapped. And then we also have the major projects that we're working on. I think that's helpful when you're talking to folks in the community for what's going on. And then we have the AMI update. It shows the amount of remote reading AMI devices. You can see on the electric side, we're saturated to about 96.8% on the electric side. We still have a ways to go on water. We're at 55, but natural gas is at 65. So that will give you an idea of how quickly we can get to the full implementation of AMI across the board. And then we have water, wastewater. which one of the key performance indicators I always look at is the sanitary sewer overflows, the infamous SSOs. And you'll see that over the past quarter, we've had 10 sanitary sewer overflows, with one being caused by residential grease, 2 of them by third-party damage. That's somebody working on our easement that hits our line. And storm and hurricane were 7 of those. So this is, I believe, really critical information for the public to understand about what we do. And then we will have a safety and training section, because that is, absolutely critical to what we do. Virtually nothing more important than making sure that people in the community and ourselves, the employees, are safe. But you can see one of the statistics there, the recordable incidents, is 0.54 over 50,000 man-hours worked. Very safe organization. 0.4 per 250,000 miles of preventable vehicle collisions. And I always like the statistics on the fourth quarter here. Total hours worked, 273,000 hours with 622,000 miles driven, right? You think of, you don't think about a community this small within this quadrant with that many vehicles driving that amount of miles. So it's a real interesting situation. We'll have customer service statistics. One of the biggies is, average speed of answer, residential, non-residential. They have all the data on callback queues. These are going to be really important when we fully implement the customer portal, AMI, throughout the organization from meter to cash. Interesting number there you see is the calls per month, 19,321. Almost 20,000 calls that are housed through this area. Let's see. And that's pretty much it. So I'd love for you to take a look at it, give us some feedback. We'll try to be improving it. We'll try to make it so that it's easier to see, a little bit more visual, as opposed to just numbers and narratives out there. And I'll try to have my COO, Tom Brown, who's, will take you through this on a regular basis so you don't have to hear my grating voice.
Mr. Pilarski, I'm assuming that this is made public somehow?
Well, just the publication here, and it will be on our website.
Okay, that's what I was saying, because, again, as we talk about how many people may or may not call our services, and this is very true, whether it be in the hospital, in the scooters, anything, the most important person is the person that's in front of you at that moment, but you don't realize what's going on.
Right.
All of a sudden, through the hurricanes, we did amazing things, but as we talk to people, as I explain to people, we have 64,000 down, they're going, oh crap, I thought it was my neighborhood.
Right. Right.
And to get this out, this is remarkable. I mean, the incident rate, you shocked me when you told me the miles.
Yeah.
Because you sit there and you don't appreciate it. So I think if we can get this to our customers and they can see what GRU does in a great way.
Right.
So any way we can do it, I think it'd be good, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to put that out on our website and actually make a little press release about it on a quarterly basis. This is what's happening.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, I think it's really important.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you. I think I'm done.
Right, our next item on the agenda for the business discussion is 2024-796, debt management policy, with a recommendation the GRU authority adopt the amended debt management policy.
Good evening. So there are 2 policies, 2 separate agenda items, so debt and investments. The slides are relatively short. In the backup, there is the policy itself. The debt policy has been in place at GRU at least as long as I've been here, so I'd say probably 15, 20 years, if not longer. We updated it back in 2022 to pull in financial metrics, because prior to that, the governing body had never approved the financial metrics. And we're bringing it forward to the authority along with the investment policy because we follow the policies unless they are approved by the authority. And we've made a couple of tweaks in the debt management policy itself. So I will just go through this briefly, and I'm going to point out some highlights. So this policy was revamped in 2022 to really focus on the debt reduction plan. We pulled those pieces into the policy itself. The debt reduction plan actually started back in 2020. So I just want to make sure folks understand that. That's not a new thing. We weren't able to fund it until now extensively. So in 2020, we had a series of transactions that started to build this debt reduction plan. We saved $134 million in those transactions. I think it was another 64 in some pension obligation bonds working with general government. So that built the floor. 2 years later, we pulled the information into the actual policy itself, and we've updated it here. So the policy is utilized for the reduction plan, but also in the budget process. There's another item a little bit later that talks about financial reporting cadence. The debt policy itself tells us what we use in the modeling for the budget process. So everything kind of ladders as we move through here. There's an investment policy, and then there's going to be a cash balance policy that comes before you, I believe, in January that also helps with that budget process as well. So while it seems like you're bringing a debt management policy to me, it actually starts to build the floor for the 2026 budget, which we've started already. So inside of the policy itself, we have stretch goals on the rating agency metrics. It provides formal support of those metrics to avoid future downgrades. Obviously, this will result in lower interest costs for our customers. And it's a well-defined debt management policy, so we're requesting full support of this. There's an organization called GFOA. It's a Government Finance Officers Association. This is one of their best practices, as well as the investment policy. So development of financial goals, budget formulation, identify trends over a multi-year period. It addresses policy objectives, the debt structure, refundings, hedging instruments, credit metrics, and delevering. We have a very complicated debt portfolio. It's very complicated, and this policy helps wrap that together. We share the policy with our financial advisor and bond counsel to make sure that we haven't missed anything, and they've both gone through it. Made some small tweaks, but they're fine with the policy itself. And so this is the good news. I always like to deliver the good news, but when you look at the debt reduction plan that is built into the policy components, you can see the debt reduction itself, trying to get folks to move away from defeasance and actually use the word reduction because that's more clear to folks, I think. So in 22, $8.3 million in debt defeasance on top of scheduled principal payments. 2023, another 3.4. But in fiscal year 2024 is almost $40 million in extra principal payments that the utility has paid down. And what is really cool, the 2017 series, A, B, and C, were what the utility utilized to purchase the PPA. So we bought out a PPA and received a plant on the other side. We've paid down $26 million of that, of one of those series, so 2017A. And I didn't realize it until I was going through the materials, and I'm like, this is amazing. So the very thing that put us where we are, we're now starting to pay that down directly. So that's fantastic. When we're running our principal drops, now again, we're going to be issuing debt for future capital infrastructure, so we're going to have some fluctuations with this. But between 23 and 24, outstanding principal dropped almost 4%. And if we continue on this path into 2025, it should drop another 4%. So in 2 years, we're going to pay down $140 million of principal payments.
It's amazing.
Absolutely. And so we're just asking for approval, formal approval of the debt management policy.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we adopt this formally, present to the board as stated.
We have a motion
I'll second.
and a second. Public comment? Back to the board for any discussion. First of all, congratulations. And
amazing.
it's like, great work. I mean, it's great to see all those plans you put in place and how quickly it's having an impact.
And Mr. Chair, again, we did not get here overnight. I remember when I first got on the board with you, we looked at a long term, and I remember making the statement that I wasn't making motions for my children, I was making motions for my great-grandchildren. I'm changing my view here. I really am. This is exciting, and I pray that our ratepayers actually look at some of this. This isn't a political move. This isn't anything. This is truly getting back to business and putting business and clients first. So thank you very much. I wish everybody could see this.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm impressed, and I think it's awesome. I'm looking forward to the fact that I know that we can continue to do it and probably find ways to get even better.
Okay, hearing that, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion passes.
All right, wonderful. The next business item is 2024-797, amendment to GRU investment policy with the recommendation the GRU authority adopt the amended GRU investment policy.
So while she's pulling that up, I did not introduce someone in the back of the room, and I'm probably going to embarrass her when I do this. Miss Linda Vaughn is our treasury manager. She is one of the architects of the debt management policy and the investment policy itself, and all of the backup that goes into it. She's a very incredible and detailed person. So thank you, Linda. And Mr. Mark Benton, you guys already know. So there's a team that works on this behind me. All right, so the investment management policy is also a best practice of the GFOA. It was last approved by a governing body in fiscal year 2022. The investments that we invest in, they're pretty boring. So it's commercial paper, corporate paper, bonds. But the reason for that is we want to preserve capital. That is our goal. We don't invest in stocks, real estate, alternative investments, certainly not Bitcoin or anything like that. We need to make sure that we have the return of the capital because our funds are used for certain things, and we need to make sure that we have the cash when the utility needs it. So it is a very complicated process as Ms. Vaughn is going through the cash flow needs. So she's dealing with multiple funds and the parameters from the state and also inside of the policy. But she's also trying to make sure we have the cash available when we need to make a capital asset addition or something like that. So we have deposits that are required to go to debt service. So we send funds to our trustee on a monthly basis for a debt service. They hold them, but we drive those investments. And so that we have the capital that we need, we might earn a little bit of interest on there that does help. They're primarily short and intermediate term, but we do pay attention to the timing of it because we certainly don't want to run out of cash. We want to make sure we're earning as much as possible by still having available cash when we need it. And I would say she's very good at that process. We try to hold investments to maturity. Very rarely we would try to actually exit an investment if we should need to. There have been times when we've had to. During COVID and the pandemic, we had to do a couple of those things. And we're requesting full support of the authority for this particular policy. So maximize returns, ensure compliance with bond covenants, statutory requirements, and other regulatory restrictions. The key areas are investment objectives, which I've described, authorized investments, which are pretty much the stable, kind of boring type investments, maturity and liquidity requirements, performance measurement benchmarks, and reporting requirements themselves. We have internally a investment committee that meets on a regular basis. We meet to review our cash and investments on a monthly basis, but also as an investment committee. And as part of the policy, we have a requirement to provide to the board an annual look through as far as where those investments are. And so that's what's included in the backup of the actual PowerPoint, and then the backup itself, it's the investment policy. And so we are looking for a recommendation for approval, but I do want to touch on a couple of things. So the utility had, at the end of September, $389 million of cash. So when you look at that size of the cash, I think that's large. It's not really, right? For me and you, it probably is, right? But not for a utility, because when you look at the different buckets, there are funds set aside for debt service. We hold customers' deposits. We have utility plant improvement fund, that's for capital. We have bond proceeds, which are for capital, and debt service, which is all restricted. So essentially, out of that 389, 50 million is in operating. And that 50 million is just very close as far as covering our monthly operating expenses. We're running on a very thin margin as far as what that is. So I just wanted to make sure that you understood that all those buckets are spoken for different things. Also debt defeasance, debt reductions in there, and that's set aside as well. So of the 389 million, it's used for activities. And when we get into the budget process, when we start talking about cash and investment levels, portions of those different buckets are used for reserves. So we can be talking about the same cash bucket, but it might be utilized for different calculations. So just as a heads up, if we move through the budget process, you're going to start to hear different things like that. So with that, if there are any questions.
So Claudia, well, it's an amended policy. What's changed?
So I would, just a couple of tweaks, wording, that sort of thing, nothing major. But the primary reason we wanted to bring it forward is because we wanted the authority to approve the policy.
So this is just a realignment from previous policies that were geared toward the city commission.
Yes, the city commission as the governing body. The other component to bringing this forward and wrapping it up is the annual update that's required to be provided to the governing body, so we're doing it all at once. Bringing the policy, having the authority approve it rather than the city commission, and giving you that annual update. Thank you.
Any other questions? Any questions?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we adopt the GRU investment management policy as stated.
I'll second that.
I waited long enough, boys.
A motion and a second. Public comment? Seeing none, back to the board. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, our next business item is 2024-795, financial reporting cadence, with a recommendation. This is information only. No vote is needed.
So there are 3 slides, and they are sort of related, so I'm going to give you an overview before I hit each one. So one is the budget calendar. The second one is what the types of financial reports that we're going to be providing to the authority, and then the audit process itself. So with the budget calendar itself, this is a proposed plan as far as the timing of the budget process. Based upon feedback from some of the board members, we are looking to possibly combine a meeting and a workshop together. The budget items, when we bring them forward, and this might help with your deliberation, when we bring them forward, they're informational only. We're not asking for a motion when you hear a budget item. It is for education, providing information, so when you get to the final draft budget that the CEO is bringing forward, you have the information that you need to make a decision on the budget for 2026. The budget cycle inside of GRU, it was 12 months, now it feels like 14 months. So we started a couple of months ago to start the budget process for fiscal year 2026. And so we created a pretty complicated internal calendar. It involves obviously every department, every person across the utilities touching some sort of budget item. And we try to start the process early, but with the HB 1645 or 2023-348, we're on a July 1st date. So before it was September. So we had another couple of months, but now it's July. So everything gets pushed backwards as far as inside the utility. So there's a tremendous amount of work that people are doing to get this in front of you. When it gets in front of you, it looks probably pretty simplified when we get to that point. So tonight, it was the debt policy and the investment policy. In December, the plan is to talk about the electric system rate tiers. And I did want to point out, because during some of the discussions, I think we've forgotten that there aren't any base rate increases in the electric system for the next 10 years as part of the 2025 budget cycle. And I think we forgot. You know, it's easy to forget those things, but the modeling holds that and bears that out.
Yeah, do you want to pause even a little bit more after you say that? I mean, that's really significant in what we did. And it allows us to get more to the average for the state in a little gentler way. But wow, I mean, that was significant.
And the attention of the legislators, why they did this.
Correct.
but also you're stuck with your debt reduction plan. So we did not sacrifice our debt reduction for rate.
That's correct.
So that was really important, right?
Yeah, we made it better.
That's correct. So in January, the proposal is go through debt, cash liquidity and reserves, and the cash balance policy. Cash balance policy is pretty in-depth, so I'm going to invite Mr. Lover back to go through that, because we commission PFM every few years to do that. In 2018, we commissioned a cash balance policy to put in reserve targets, because prior to that, the governing body, the City Commission, had never formally approved reserve levels. So we put in the policy that puts in those reserve levels, and it's pretty complicated because you're looking at hurricane risk, fuel risk, et cetera. It's interesting because during the pandemic, our cash levels started dropping, but when you were looking at the reasons, accounts receivable were up because of people struggling to pay their bills. Fuel was up. Costs started increasing. And so the cash balance policy during the pandemic worked as it was designed. It allowed us to take cash from rate stabilization, move it into operating to stabilize. So I didn't imagine a pandemic and all of these things happening all at once, but when it did, it was good that we had that there. And so we've updated it with PFM. The reserve targets are going up. They're in our current modeling. So when you approve the 25 budget, they were already in there. But we'll go through that on the 8th if the authority is good with the schedule. And so with the debt, cash, and liquidity, think about it like a balance sheet, and we're going to talk about the income statement portions of the budget. So when you move into April, it's sales revenue, connection charges, lighting charges. So that's going to be the revenue side. In May, we're going to talk about operations and maintenance expenses and capital expenditures. So our expense side to move to June to hit that July 1st budget. So any questions on the budget calendar itself? I do want to make sure that the workshop and the meeting, if you choose to do it that way, you would end the workshop and start a meeting. But if we do these as informational, I'm not entirely sure that you need to do a workshop, but I'll leave it up to you guys, obviously, to talk that through. So we were trying to marry some of the comments from board members as far as what this might look like. So for those of you that haven't been following our budget cycles for the past several years, when the UAB, the Utility Advisory Board, came on, we had a long up ramp with that board, and so that's why these topics ended up getting spread out. Prior to the UAB, GRU would partner with general government. We would go to the governing body at the time. We'd spend a few days in July talking about the budget, and it was just like 8-12 hours. It's a lot. And so,
Golf course.
Yes, yes, exactly. And so breaking this up into more bite-sized pieces allows for better understanding, more back and forth, as far as the governing body. You can ask questions, you can tell us what you'd like to see. So that's why you see it spread. So we went from a day and a half of a budget, 200-ish pages, to spreading that 200-ish pages over this. So that's why you see this today. So we prepare internal financial statements, so year over year and budget to actual, at different forms and fashion, but we will be providing those to the authority on a quarterly basis. We will also be providing the graphic that you saw a few months ago for the GAAP revenues and expenses. You'll see a visualization with the pie charts, et cetera, so you can see it a snapshot, what that looks like. Because I realize reading financial statements, some people like to do it, some people don't. Some people are very visual and like to see that information in a visual format. And so we've been working on the visual format just to give you a couple of varieties. So you'll get the normal statements, and then you'll get that visualization. We will also be providing a financial ratio analysis. So we talked about the debt policy. Inside of the debt policy, we have our credit metrics. So starting in May, you'll start seeing those credit metrics for fiscal year 25, and that will be for the March date. So as a reminder, our fiscal year starts October 1st, ends in September. The financial statements and budgets will start after December, so you'll see those in February, and then we'll start that cadence there. But the financial ratios they look off because there's only 3 months of the year, so you won't see it for the first quarter, but you'll see it after the second quarter. We prepare them internally so that we know where we're landing as far as the financial metrics, so that when we talk to a rating agency, we know where we think we stand. Because sometimes mistakes are made when they're going through their analysis. We want to make sure that we understand our calculations, so when we talk with them, we can make sure that their calculations match ours. And so we'll be coming back in December with the September financial metrics. So I do want to just give you an update, because we've looked at some preliminary numbers. So our leverage at the end of September 30th, 2023 was 11.94. It's dropped to 9.27. Our goal is 8. So our leverage, it's our debt. Okay, so if you think about it that way. So with the reduction in the principal payments for outstanding debt, it's decreasing our leverage, and it's getting closer to where Fitch wants us. So that's also good news. So by the end of 25, we should be a little closer. Now remember, we'll be issuing debt, so we're going to be shifting up and down a little bit, but this is definitely good news, and we'll bring you back a little bit more formal presentation in December.
Are we going to have a 3-second celebration?
Uh-oh, sorry, I lost was that me? Okay. Sometimes there are commentary about auditing GRU. GRU is audited by Baker Tilly on an annual basis. Our financial statements are audited by Baker Tilly. And we're in the middle of that process now. Baker Tilly is a national firm. They are good at utilities and regulatory accounting. They also provide training. They speak at like the American Public Power events. They're very active in the market. They've been working with GRU, goodness, I think for at least a decade. Became our auditors. Goodness, sorry, the years start to run together, but several years ago. But they're very good at what they do. And they're able to help us through some of these complicated topics. So like, for example, GRU has put in a debt reduction plan that creates its own types of conversations when it comes to the audit. And, and they're able to have those conversations with us, and we work through the audit process. We have a good working relationship with them. They are auditors. And so they come in July, August to do preliminary field work, and we generally finish up in March as far as the audit process. I'd like to finish in January, but we typically are working with general government for pension information. They are doing a great job at trying to get that pension information to us earlier so we can issue earlier. Because typically, if we're trying to get into the market to do a transaction, I need the audited financial statements, right? And so that is a little bit of a back and forth that we have, but I would tell you the finance director at general government is doing an excellent job working with us as far as the pension information is concerned. So you can see up on the screen, we've completed a couple of the boxes, and then the work will continue on to eventually issue somewhere between January and March. We will have preliminary numbers to show you in December, and the numbers will move. My accounting department reminds me every day the numbers are going to move. So I know that because we're going through the process, but the income statement won't move that much. It's usually the balance sheet. So you'll see the information in December. So we have financial information we'll be bringing to you. The budget cycle is starting now, and we are currently under our financial statement audit. Thank you. It's information only, I think.
It was information only.
Anyone have any questions for Claudia? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The final item on business discussion is item 2024-808, Deerhaven Renewable Outage Discovery, with a recommendation that GRU will repair the turbine rotor prior to returning it to service to prevent further damage. This item is for information-only purposes to the GRU authority, notifying them of the situation and the repair that's needed.
The Chair, Directors, good evening. Dino Delio, Energy Supply Officer. So as the motion talked about, I'm here to talk about discovery work that we had during the most recent Deerhaven renewable outage. It's in progress right now. We conduct outages on our units periodically. And the purpose of the outages is to ensure the unit is 100% reliable in between outages. So the periodicity is based on the unit history We have periodicities of a year, we have periodicities up to 2 years. DHR is on that lower end. Typically do annual outages. So we had an annual outage scheduled this year, starting in September, would run through the middle of this month, November. The critical path work for that particular outage was the steam turbine. That steam turbine by its design is at a 10-year periodicity for inspections. So this would actually be the first inspection of this turbine since it went in commercial operation in December of 2013. So we had a little slow start to the outage. Hurricanes did not help us. To access this turbine, you have to physically remove the roof from the building and use a crane to pull things out. So when Milton came up and developed very quickly, we basically had to stabilize and get the crane out of there, obviously because it's like a sail. So we slowly started the outage. The first scope of work was to get the turbine casing off and the turbine rotor. Rotor is the rotating element for the turbine. That rotor was removed on October 17th. We immediately began our inspection. So we had our original equipment manufacturer for that turbine, which is Siemens, on site. Siemens started conducting non-destructive testing on the unit and discovered at the beginning that the very first stage had what we call a dampening wire and had 35 cracks in the dampening wire. The dampening wire runs around the perimeter of the first stage. So this is a 16-stage turbine, but the first stage, it sees the highest pressure, the highest temperature, and highest differential pressure inside the turbine. Those cracks were discovered, and then our path was, what do we do with the cracks? Because the next inspection is going to be 2034, 10 years away. The risk of that is too high to go 10 years without repairing the cracks, because the risk could be to the turbine is if a piece of that basically dampening wire fell off and traveled through the rest of the turbine, we would be doing extensive damage to the turbine. Additionally, that dampening wire is what holds the blades. There's 169 blades on that wheel to the wheel itself. So if the dampening wire were to break, we could have significant vibration in that wheel that would require us to shut the unit down. So working with Siemens, the determination was made, that's got to be repaired. To repair it, we have to replace the dampening wire. There's a seal that goes around the shroud, and then we have to replace the blades. So turbine blades, most components like bearings, they exist in a stock system. Turbine blades do not. They're manufactured to a particular project and application. You won't find them on a shelf. You certainly aren't going to find 169 of them like we would need. So we work with Siemens to look both domestically and internationally if there were any other applications where turbines were being manufactured where we could procure those blades and then replace those blades with our procurement process and use them. There was no applications of that turbine design available to us. So the next step is to see if there's any manufacturing fabrication capability domestically and internationally. We did not find anybody domestically that could get us in their queue, in other words, start the manufacturing process and as soon enough time to restore that turbine. But Siemens was able to find an international manufacturer, fabricator in Switzerland. So the engineering team immediately worked with procurement the 24th of October to get those blades on order so that we could start that procurement process. In the interim, when you come back to GRU, that rotor by design for this outage was never designed to leave the site. It was designed to stay on the renewable site. The scope of this work requires that the rotor actually be in the Siemens shop in Charlotte, North Carolina. And the reason why, it's a 25-ton rotor, 20 feet long, 8 feet wide, and it needs to be put in a lathe, the lathe that they have in Charlotte. So we immediately worked the logistics. It's a wide load shipment. The insurance we needed to have on the rotor in order for it to put it on the road. And we shipped that to the Charlotte site on the 29th of October, and it arrived on the 30th of October. So the rotor itself is currently in the shop in Charlotte, and they'll be removing the blades that are on there right now. And the blades that are being manufactured in Switzerland will be sent directly to the Charlotte shop. Now, they will have to go through customs, and you may think that's easy. It's not. But they'll go through customs, and they'll be delivered to the shop. The intent is for them to work through their holiday schedule. They have us on their schedule to have that rotor repaired, which means to replace those blades, that again, dampening wire in the groove, and then ship it back to the renewable site sometime mid-January, as we think, first week to mid-January. We're gonna need about 2.5 weeks of our own time to work with the Siemens team that will return to put the turbine back together. And then we go to operation, and we built another 5 days to a week that may require the turbine rotor to be balanced. With that scope of work being done, it rotates at 3,600 revolutions a minute. We may need to do balance shots to make sure that rotor is gonna be within our vibration platform. So we're estimating that the rotor itself, the turbine itself will be released late January or the first week of February for availability. And the cost of this repair, our estimate right now, between material and services, is about $1.1 million addition to our outage cost and 2.5 to 3 month delay. And believe it or not, with this scope of work, that's a pretty accelerated timeline. Nobody's gonna talk about the cost, but the timeline and find a fabricator to get it done and get it back in service beginning of February is gonna be good for us. And so I'm subject to any questions. That's where we're at.
I would interject one thing that Dino didn't talk about. This was part of the whole idea of giving you the bad news as well as the good news, right? And you need to understand what we're all going through. I mean, typically you wouldn't have an outage report delivered, but I think it's really important for there not to be misinformation out in the community. Deerhaven Renewable was down. We're taking care of it professionally. And by the way, Dino and his group, they schedule these outages in shoulder months when we're producing less electricity. So they have the period of time when something is wrong. They don't have to scurry and get back quickly. Right now, he's probably producing generation at a pretty good price given the price of natural gas. So we're actually saving some money that will pay some of that $1 million as well. So I just wanted to.
We have reserves for these unexpected.
Well, we have cash reserves, that's for sure. We try not to build in those reserves into the budget. So we're looking for Dino to save $1 million somewhere else.
Gotcha.
I didn't tell you that, Dino, but I thought.
I'm sure you will. Just like anybody else, we have to live within our means. So we'll look at the critical path, other work we have, our capital, we have 14 million in capital, and we'll work with Claudia the best we can to accommodate what we have to, but we may need to prioritize the work. But the risk of this, with the 2034 inspection, is the next periodicity would not be worth living with the cracks, because those cracks propagate through the wire. Now it's a loose wire in our turbine. We're not talking about just material, we're talking about vibration.
Dino, from the dampening wire damage that you found, is that why you're having to replace the blades? Just, were you always planning on replacing the blades?
It's a great question. So how the dampening wire, so the blades themselves are manufactured 169. They're dovetailed to the blade wheel itself. The shrouds are on the outside of the blades. They're individual shrouds. So what they do is they put it on a lathe and they generate a groove in the middle of those shrouds. And in that groove, they put a seal. It's called a J seal. The J seal goes around all 169 blades, and then that pneumatic wire that I'm talking about, dampening wire, gets pushed into that groove, and it's cold worked into the shroud. It actually deforms the blade shroud, because it's holding the blades together. So when you pull it out, the blades have already been damaged. Because of that, it's holding it together. You have to replace the blades.
Yeah.
It's a great question.
Yeah, thank you.
Just clarification, because I've heard in social media, this is why we shouldn't have bought the plant. I don't need to get my calculator out and do 1.1 million versus our cost savings, but Mr. General Manager, still a good deal, even though this would have happened whether we were owning it or not, and it was cooked into our purchase agreement. And heavily cooked in, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, for memory's sake, we would have saved the $771 million if we had not run the plant at all. But what we did was run the plant over this period of time, gave us fuel diversity, became our second cheapest at certain times of the year, and we've had very little problem with it. So, the $771 million in savings just on the financing cost, well, now that went to 770.
To my point, we still stand by our decision to purchase this
Oh,
plant.
absolutely. This is just the cost of doing business.
Exactly. Again, that's stuff people, they really don't hear. And I wanted to hear it from the body.
Right.
Several months ago, we heard from the suppliers And what kind of implications does this have for our suppliers? Are we at risk for losing any of our suppliers because of the extended outage?
So another great question, and again, the variable cost of megawatts for DHR today is about $42. You compare that to the combined cycle, about $18 for the Kelly plant, $25 for Deerhaven 1, $26 a megawatt for Deerhaven 2. So DHR, at the current natural gas prices, we were down to $1.85 in natural gas earlier this week. But between that $2.30, you actually have to get almost to $4.35 natural gas for the biomass plant to be in the money. So we are going to be replacing that power, as the gentleman, or CEO said, with less cost. The issue is, you talked about, we have 30,000 tons of wood on site that we have to maintain and coordinate as well. It's not old wood, it's fairly fresh wood, but you worry about hot spots and you have to move that product around. And then you now have to coordinate deliveries. So when that date gets closer to February, about a week out, we've been already in communications with our provider, BRM, Bioresource Materials is our provider. They know that we're delayed. We let them know early on because the landowners have to contract the truckers, right, to bring the material in. So we'll have a little bit of room on that front end, 2 to 3 weeks to start a slow pickup of wood and then pick up, but it's going to be impactful. Those truck drivers are going to go somewhere else to make money, and we're going to have to slowly bring them in. But if we start that in mid-January, we will be at the point where we have 30,000 tons on site that we won't need to ramp up until mid-February, even when we're running, because we want to burn that oldest product first off the site before we bring new product in. But it's not like it's not going to have any impact to them, but we've been communicating, and of course, we'll coordinate that slow ramp up and hope. And we've got experience with this. We've been down before with the plant, with material issues, so we think we can navigate our way through this.
Are we contracted for the rate, the cost of the wood, or is there the risk that they could go back and reprice the wood to try to recover some of their losses?
Well,
Does that make sense?
I believe BRM does a series of fixed and variable short-term types of deals. I'm not sure about the exact status
So
on the
BRM,
ones there.
As the CEO said, the BRM has contracts with individual providers, up to 40 different individual providers, because we're 125 to 140 trucks a day when we're actually fully running. So they have their pricing with those. We don't have access to that information, rightfully so, by the way. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to negotiate if it's a public record. Everybody would know the price. So they do have different contractors at different price, but the price point is pretty common because you have to be in the money for us to continue to use you. If you get farther out, because again, as I said, $42 a megawatt, 2 years ago, we were at $36 a megawatt. So we're getting farther away from where natural gas is, and that's why they were here previously. But we have to work with them, but the price that we're going to be is whatever the market draws, and it's fairly consistent.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
No, I love hearing about the mechanics of it though, so I appreciate it.
You and me both. Thank you.
Thank you, Dina.
All right, our next item of business is director comments.
That's us.
That would be you.
So I'll go, Jack, anything from you?
I don't know legally.
Okay, thank you, David.
No, I mean, there was public comment brought up, but some of those guys left, so there's,
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
No? Continue to do the great work.
I'm going to surprise you tonight. I'm shutting my mouth.
And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.